Now I'm going to close the swatches panel, but open the pages panel because everything we've done so far is on a single page. However, in real-world publishing, you'll probably also be dealing with facing pages or spreads, like in a newspaper or magazine. So here in the Pages palette, let's click the New button 2 more times. So here we have a single page, and here we have a spread. So with that in mind, let's go to the View menu and choose Entire Pasteboard, and we'll close up that Pages panel. Now, the reason I want to do this is I want to show you there are actually different kinds of guides. So we talked about dragging a guide down from the ruler, and you can see here that that applies just to that page, or if I drag over to the right, just to that page. But what if I want a ruler guide that spans both sides of the spread? All you have to do is press the Control key or Command on the Mac, and that will cause that ruler guide to span both sides of the spread. When I let go of the Control key or the Command key, it will drop that ruler guide down on just one side. So I can have guides on just one side or the other, or pressing Control on Windows or Command on the Mac will make that guide span both sides. Now another way to do this is click in the ruler, drag down, and instead of dragging over the page here, I will actually drag outside in the pasteboard. Now there is something very different about how guides work in InDesign compared to most other applications. That is that InDesign really considers them objects. What I mean is if I click and drag around this page, it's convenient that there's no other content right now, but as I click and drag, I'm actually selecting all of those ruler guides. That means I can do some pretty interesting things with them. For example, let's open the Layers panel. Click the New button down here at the bottom while you press the Alt key on Windows or the Option key on the Mac, and we'll create a new layer and we'll call it Guides. Now let's come back here and make sure we do have our guides selected. Now I have to admit, I confused myself for a minute there. None of the guides are selecting. Do you know why? Well, let's go to the View menu, choose Grids and Guides, and the guides are locked. Okay, so that would be helpful. Let's unlock those guides, just in case you make the same mistake that I did. Now I'll select those guides. They're all selected. Now when I go to the Layers panel, you can see this little icon right here. That indicates that those are the selected items. Now when I take those selected guides and drag them up to the Guides layer, they actually move from the Layer 1 up to the Guides layer. And the visual cue here is that the color actually changes to match the color of the layer that they're on. Now, because guides are actually considered objects in InDesign, we also have some interesting options, including the ability to distribute and align all of our guides. So we have these 4 guides selected. I'll choose the Distribute Vertical Centers option, and you'll see those all spread out evenly, which might be really convenient just to set things up in your layout. Now, with all of those guides still selected, let's copy them. So Control-C on Windows or Command-C on the Mac. And those guides are now on the clipboard. So if we press Control-N on Windows or Command-N on the Mac to make a new document, go ahead and select the default document preset and click OK. Now we'll press Control-V or Command-V on the Mac, and those same guides will be dropped down on the page at the same increments. So guides are much more flexible here inside of InDesign, allowing us to really treat them as objects and use them in other situations. So if you set something up that you really like in one document, you can easily copy and paste them into other documents and share them with other folks that you work with. So let's close this document, Control-W on Windows or Command-W on the Mac, and we don't need to save it. So I'm going to click off here in the pasteboard to deselect all of those guides. And remember that when you have a guide selected, the color of that guide corresponds to the layer that it's on. But we do have more options than that. For example, if you right-click or control-click with a single button mouse on the Mac, you can choose the Ruler Guides command for selected guides. And in this dialog box, we can choose the color for any specific guide. So if I want this guide to be olive green, I can choose that. Click OK, and when I deselect that, you can see that it's changed its color. So the advantage here is while you might have some general guides for your overall layout, in certain instances where you're trying to line up specific pieces of a layout, you can pull down specific guides, give them custom colors, and that way it's easier to find them as you're lining up your objects. The other advantage to putting guides on their own layer is that you can hide just certain sets of layers, and you can also lock just certain sets of layers. That's as opposed to the menu commands under grids and guides, which hides and locks all of them. You can actually have multiple layers with different sets of guides and really have a lot of very granular control over them. Just a few more things to look at include under the View menu, Grids and Guides. Remember that you can also show a baseline grid. That way you can make sure that all of your text across multiple columns and frames is always lining up. Let's press Control-0 or Command-0 on the Mac to zoom in there. And it looks like we might have to zoom in a little bit more to see that baseline grid. And this would allow you, again, to line up all your baselines so all your text is consistent. Let's go under the View menu again, one last time. We can also show a document grid. And this gets very detailed. You might even start to think it gets a little busy, but you do have options. And remember that all of the increments and dividers for your document grid and your baseline grid are determined back in your application preferences. So I'll turn those off again for now. I'll do the same thing with the baseline grid. Just choose the same command again and hide the baseline grid. Press Control-0 or Command-0 on the Mac to zoom out to fit in window. And the last thing we'll look at is actually deleting guides. So I can use my selection tool, select an individual guide, and just press the delete key. That's really easy. However, if you do have lots and lots of guides that you want to delete, maybe you want to start over again, you can always come up to the Layout menu, choose Create Guides, and this time choose 0 rows, 0 columns, and remember this option, remove existing ruler guides. That's just an easy way to not add any new guides, but just blow away the existing ones, click OK, and the document's all cleaned up.